Hi guys, it's Kian. So today I wanted to talk a bit about the idea of the idea of gender, and how you don't really have to confine both your own identification of how you feel, like your gender, as well as the outward presentation of how you wanna present yourself to others. How it doesn't have to be, strictly like a boy, girl, man, women, but some form of third thing. And for me, that third thing is non-binary, or androgynous. And the way I've described my particular brand of androgyny to my brother, was from something else that I've seen. So I can't remember where I saw it, but it gave me a different way of thinking about androgyny and about and in term so it was talking mainly about outward appearance and clothes and stuff, but that same thinking can then really be applied later back onto your own sense of how you view yourself, your identity, your gender, away from that outer presentation. So I'm gonna just briefly tell you what that is. So generally speaking, let's set up two ends of the spectrum, one end of androgyny and the other end of androgyny. For the sake of illustration, let's have one end of it being like, a person wearing, let's say, a white t-shirt and jeans and sneakers. So that kind of androgyny, that kind of outward presentation of androgyny is kind of like, this is a certain outfit that a person who is male body, female body, or like whatever body can wear, and kind of will just be like, oh, they are kind of androgynous. And then this tends to be kind of male presenting usually, but not necessarily always the case. The other side of androgyny is kind of like, imagine somebody who's like maybe having a buzz cut, but then like very heavy winged eyeliner, maybe wearing like a crop top and a skirt, but also like, I don't know, combat boots and sporting like a moustache or something. So maybe having painted nails, but very muscular, very toned. So when you set it up like this, it's easy to see that like this idea of neither man nor woman, like neither boy nor girl in the outward presentation, in itself has variety. It is not like a monolith of like all androgynous people look like this or all non-binary people look like this. I'm not going to talk about gender fluid because I feel like in terms of expression, a lot of gender fluid people, at least online, tend to present it as, some days I dress like a boy, some days I dress like a girl, depending on how I feel, or some days I dress androgynously, depending on how I feel. I want to talk a bit about this middle space where I find myself most drawn to, of being non-binary and being androgynous. So the way I describe it to my brother, which like when I gave him these two examples, I was like, one way to think of it is like one spectrum to the other, right? Kind of like a bland androgyny, and then the other one is kind of like a very okay. So the way I describe it to him, in maybe not the best language, but I was like, this is kind of like a very like genderless or gender neutral kind of androgyny, and this one was kind of like a very gender full kind of androgyny. And I think the easiest way to sum it up is, imagine there's two dolls. There could be more than two, but for simplicity's sake, let's say there's two. So imagine one is a doll of like how you present typically male, and how how you present typically female. So we can use this for dressing, which is what we're talking about right now, but we can apply it later to things like your identity, your how you choose to approach things like that. So imagine you have two dials and you can push them up all the way from 0 to 100, right? So I would say the gender neutral or genderless kind of dressing is a bit more like you kind of push both dials down quite far. Or maybe I guess since a white t-shirt and jeans tends to look more androgynous if it's a certain cut, and that certain cut tends to be a male cut, it could be that, you know, the dial on the male side of things is like maybe 10, like the dial on the boy side of things is like maybe 10, and then the dial on the girl side of things is like maybe 2. And that would be kind of that example of androgyny. And then the other end of it would then be the very genderful presentation, would be like maybe both dials turn up to like 90 something. And I start with the outward presentation because I think that's something that is easy to see. And that's also been kind of how it's easier for me to understand where I am in terms of my non-binary identity. So I don't particularly mind that I'm in a female body. And like, you know, growing up socialized as a girl has been my history. That has been a lot of what informed the kind of person that I am, the kind of experiences that has shaped who I've become. And I went through a period in which I was kind of like I was a tomboy, but in identifying as tomboy, I still believed that I was a girl. And there was a period of time where it was basically like this thinking of I can be a girl without needing to be constrained by the idea that I am forced to dress a certain way. I can be like, I was in a space where I was kind of like, okay, here's an expanded idea of what girlhood could be, and that it includes being a tomboy, wearing shorts, hitting skirts, being kind of not dainty nor feminine in my behavior or gestures. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And for a long time, I've kind of embraced that for myself in that expanded boundary of what girl could be. And bear in mind, I'm not talking about all of this like it's theory. I'm talking about it mainly as it pertains to my life and how I'm trying to use all these ideas to understand myself. So for a long time, I thought like I was a girl, but I don't mind the label girl. I don't like the label of woman. And as I got older and, you know, got more awareness and knowledge of like other gender identities, I think the idea of non-binary has been the label that kind of is closest to what I think of myself as, and kind of stuck around the longest because it doesn't require me to kind of pin down exactly what I am. Like when I'm being myself, alone by myself, away from people where, you know, there's no judgment or whatever, I don't really think of myself in necessarily gendered terms. Of course, there are still bits of like being socialized to be certain ways, to kind of lean a bit more towards trying to get people to exist in harmony rather than being more assertive about things. I think that is more a socialized thing for girls, and particularly for me. But yeah, non-binary has stuck around primarily because I think it's the most freeing and comfortable way I can think of myself. And I think in terms of thinking about the outward expression of like boy or girl, as dials that you can push up and down. So I think in terms of dressing, I'm slightly higher on the boy scale than the girl one. But if we're strictly talking about clothes, I'm not. I do mainly buy stuff from. Well, no, actually, I do have stuff from both the male and female section. It doesn't. I would say it's about a fair mix. And usually, for example, if I'm buying a men's cut, something from the men's section, I tend to choose a softer material. If I'm buying something from the women's section, I try to choose a slightly stiffer material or a slightly more structured cut. So there is a bit of that balance of like masculine and feminine. But in terms of my own personal gender identity, I would say like it's quite close to that. I think because I've slowly gotten a bit more comfortable with the idea of like expressing myself outwardly as I feel inside, and how that's kind of the more coherent way. Not saying that I necessarily have to look a certain way on the outside to feel how I feel on the inside, but that it definitely feels more congruent to have a way of presenting myself so that people can treat me the way I internally think of myself as. And I'm nowhere near complete on that journey, I guess. But it's something that's probably gonna always be a work in progress. Anyway, back to gender. So I would say the two dials are pretty low on both scale of boy and girl. And that is my brand of like non-binariness at this point in time. Like, I hate being mistaken for a guy. I don't like using he, him pronouns. I'm okay with she, her pronouns, probably due to like historical reasons of it being, the way I was caught growing up. And I can't really be bothered to, make people use they, them for me. Like, it doesn't bother me that much to have she, her. But I would say if I were to put preferred pronouns, it would be she/they. But it's kind of like, it's fine. Because in my head, I don't think of myself as a gendered being. Although I do know that I hate the idea of being mistaken for a boy. I don't know why. But outwardly dressing, I am in this kind of in-between zone of being quite low on the scale of like genderness of both like male and female or boy and girl, however you want to put it. Yeah, but I think something that's interesting to think about once I have this model of like, boy and girl being like two scales that can push up and down is that like if one is significantly higher than the other, you will kind of appear outwardly more one than the other. But I think as long as both are kind of like in balance with each other, you will be sort of perceived as like androgynous or non-binary. Although technically non-binary doesn't have to be androgynous. But it's just kind of my own expression of it is androgynous. So I guess what I'm trying to say is also like, for example, things like this very visible hair clips. At a point in time, I would feel like this is too girly for me, a bit like pushing the boundary of like what I feel comfortable with in terms of being non-binary. But with this idea of the scale in mind, it's kind of like if I up the scale on the girl side, I just need to up the scale on the boy side a little bit, and that would work. So that's why today I have a backpack, a large oversized shirt, but also my hairy unshaven legs out because that's a male-ish trait in our society. I don't know. I don't know how to talk about this without feeling a bit like I need to have caveats every sentence to not sound like I'm being non-progressive about it. I'm really not. I'm really trying not to. But also at the same time, it's a bit funny that like I'm trying to describe my own experience and feeling like I can't use certain words to describe it. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like I've rambled on quite a bit. Really the idea that I thought was interesting is a way of thinking of gender as like two sliding scales. It's not a perfect model, but if you've never considered it that way before, maybe it could be something that sheds a different light on how you consider gender. And for me, it's kind of like, I won't say it's been life-changing because, it's really not. But it was, when I described this to my brother, it was a very helpful way of describing to him how I personally feel about where I am in the non-gender view of things. Like non-binary. In the non-binary view of things. Because as much as labels are not the end all and be all, they are important landmarks in how I start to navigate where I am or where I want to be, or like thinking about myself. And in trying to describe that to other people, this is what I've found to be useful. So yeah. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say for this topic for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.